A short story by Paul McCann. The Touchstone. It was a cold Saturday evening in the prison cell, and morning was a long time off. The jingle of the prison guard's keys and the click-clack of his steel-shod heels cut through the silence as the inmates were drifting off to sleep. Every night before the guard did his rounds, Jack would begin meditating and holding the touchstone that was given to him by Tinley, a Tibetan monk from China who had visited the prison to introduce meditation techniques to the inmates of the prison. Anytime Jack felt troubled, he would hold the touchstone and gently hum 3 notes in concession. Over and over until he was calm and relaxed. Jack found just by meditating he could escape the walls of the prison cell. In his meditation, Jack would imagine that he was an eagle flying through the sky, and outside the confines of the prison he could escape. Not many would ever imagine how Jack was able to do that. The touchstone had a strange, soothing effect that allowed him to cope with most everything that put him on the edge. The years passed slowly, and in the morning Jack was to be released, and he was going to leave the cold prison life behind, for he had done his time, and now he was at last going to be a free man. When Sunday came, Jack walked out the front door of the prison. He was collected by the driver of the community service bus, who took him to a halfway house where he was to commence a resettlement program. He asked the driver if he could do him a small favour and drive up the mountain road just for a brief stop. And the driver recognised and understood how it must have felt to be locked up for years inside a prison. So the bus went up the mountain road and came to the side and rested there near the top of the mountain, where Jack took the touchstone to a place where he left it in the morning sun, because for him the stone had no more use. It had done its job, and he hoped maybe somebody else might find it. As he walked away from the touchstone, he felt an enormous weight had been lifted off his shoulders. The little community bus made its way back down the mountain road again as the sun in the sky shone brightly down. And on the top of the mountain, the touchstone started to softly glow. And as it did, it attracted the eagle in the sky that swooped down and took the stone in its talons. But after a while the stone became too heavy, and as a result the eagle lost its grip on the stone, and the stone fell to the ground, landing with a splash in the local swimming pool. Fortunately, being a Sunday, the pool was closed, so nobody got hit on the head. Then in the morning, a regular swimmer by the name of Sam arrived at the pool to do some laps. Just before he drove into the pool, he looked up in the sky, and he could see a change coming, the clouds overhead, and thought he maybe should get over and get into the water as soon as possible before it got cold. So he got changed and went into the swimming pool and dove straight in. And then he got out, and he stood there and he noticed something glowing at the bottom. He thought maybe it was a reflection of the sun. So in any case, he went to investigate. Down to the bottom he swam, and shortly afterwards he retrieved the stone from the floor of the swimming pool, and he grabbed it in his hand and returned to the surface with it in his hands. Sam had recently been diagnosed with cancer, and the moment that he held the stone, he felt something inside him explode, and he knew somehow he had been received a gift of healing. He couldn't explain it, It was almost like something had come over him and taken the cancer away. He could feel a dramatic change in his being, from the top of his head to the bottom of his feet. He quickly put the stone into his grip bag, got changed, and then he went to visit his doctor. It was a cold and a wet Monday now, and he was glad to get inside the doctor's, where a large crowd of people were waiting to see the doctor. Inside the waiting room there was some talk between some of the people. Some of the mothers had just left the children at school, and there were old men coughing and turning the pages of their newspapers. And there were other people just sitting there, looking at the ceiling, looking frustrated. Old women with walking sticks making their way into the waiting room, and the doctor still hadn't arrived yet to see any of the patients who were sitting there patiently waiting in the waiting room. The receptionist smiled at everyone who was there. "Sweet surrender," an old woman sighed. A tiny baby screamed for a feed. A small girl on her mother's knee sneezed as she was joined then by a middle-aged man who sneezed, and that was followed by another old man with a nagging cough. There was a man with an arm in a plaster. He made a fist and he said, "I've got an itch and I can't scratch it." The man beside him replied, "I've got a sneeze and it won't come." Sam looked around and saw some of the people in there. He thought to them, they've already started digging their graves. The receptionist put on the radio to distract everyone from getting distracted. The top of the hour came, and the news presenter read a report about something so terrible. Everyone stopped to have a listen. This morning, on a busy city street, an innocent man in his 20s was killed by an armed man with a machete. As he tried to escape, a bystander grappled with the crazed attacker and held him until the police arrived. The hungry baby in the waiting room began to cry again, and it was difficult to hear the rest of the 10 o'clock news. Sam whispered to himself again, "Who needs it anyway?" Every time the door opened, everyone turned around and hoped it would be the doctor. An old woman who could barely walk came into the waiting room. She was out of breath and almost ready to faint. She really needed somebody to assist her to sit down and to give her an empty chair, but no one offered. Sam couldn't resist. He stood up and he walked over and helped the woman to sit in his chair. Then he stood by the window and started to think about his life, and somehow he felt that he was lucky to have this moment in time, just to think, just to reflect. But everyone else in the waiting room wasn't so peacefully calm and relaxed. They were sitting around, panicking, waiting for the doctor to come, thinking about the gloom and the doom. Somehow, Sam knew that his sickness had left him. And he knew that he could redefine his life somehow, his existence, because for a long time, Sam had been sick of being sick, but now he had a new feeling inside. He looked around the waiting room again at the people who had lost that glow of life. He saw darkness and sadness in their eyes, and he felt a pity in them as they sat there looking glum with their heads down. And for the hungry baby and for those who couldn't even breathe, he felt so sorry for them. He thought that life should not be so sad and people shouldn't have to be kept waiting with their coughs and their sneezes and with hungry tummies. And then he thought about the stone in his bag and how all of a sudden he had this new thinking, and he wished that he could share a kind reassuring word with one or two of those sick people. He wanted to cheer everyone up. Then it came to him. Sam spoke quietly enough so everyone could hear. "I wonder when the doctor will arrive to see us," he said. But nobody answered. Then it came to him, so he went outside and he took the stone with him from the bag, and he prayed for all the people in the waiting room who were sick in mind or body, and he knew that as he prayed, some of those sick people would receive a healing. Then it made him feel better to be aware of how he could be able to helped some people in a small way just by thinking of them and holding the stone and praying for them. And it was at this point when the doctor arrived. Sam went back inside the waiting room and heard the doctor apologize for being late. The doctor went into his room and called the old lady who was sitting in Sam's seat, and the doctor smiled at everyone else. Finally, it was Sam's turn to go in, and he took a seat beside the doctor's large desk and he said, "Doc, I'm cured. It's a miracle," he said. The doctor wrote him a referral for an x-ray and told Sam to go there straight away. Sam thanked him and he did as he was asked. When he got to the x-ray and pathology unit, he took a seat in the waiting room. As he sat there, he looked at all the people there. A young medical student in a wheelchair approached him and confirmed Sam's personal details before the x-ray. Sam waited only a brief time and was told that there was no change from the previous x-ray, that the cancer was still there. But Sam knew that he was healed. So as he walked out the medical centre, he walked quickly down Trench Street and his mind was on other things, and in that moment in time he crossed the road without stopping to look, and a heavy truck was coming through from Alice Avenue and had no chance of stopping in time to avoid Sam, who was propelled head first into a pole on the side of the road. His bag was flung open and the stone flew like a bullet from the bag onto the side of the road, where it came to rest at an open drain hole in the gutter. No one had noticed the stone, as most of the crowd were focused on Sam, who lay motionless on the road. When the ambulance and police arrived, Sam had already died. The police spoke to some bystanders who all gave their account of the accident. That evening the news of Sam's death made headline news. Night time came on a Monday when Sam said his goodbye to the world. It was lunchtime on a frosty Tuesday morning, and the sidewalks were busy with people on their way to work and school. Shopkeepers were opening up, and early morning coffee vans were doing a brisk trade. Trains were rolling into different platforms at Redemption Station, and outside people were running to catch their connection with a government bus. Tuesdays were a special occasion for Clive, Craig, Harry and Al, because it was a free day from their studies at university. And every Tuesday at midday, inside Mad Hatter's tea room, the four lads would meet to have lunch together. Tuesdays at Mad Hatter's was special as well, because between midday and 1 o'clock it was happy hour, when all of the food was half price. So it was a perfect venue for four scrounging students. The four university students were known as the four philosophers. They always had a regular lunch together, and as they ate they would discuss the theme of the day that was presented by the speaker of that week. It was then up to the other three in the group to solve the riddle or address the problem that was raised. Each week a new speaker in sequence took his turn to present a topic. This Tuesday's speaker was Clive, who always had an issue with the other three in the group talking over each other, and he frequently had to interrupt the group to try to get them to speak in turn. So this Tuesday, as Clive made his way into the city on the train, he came up with an idea to use some device that would keep order during their weekly discussion. His first idea was to bring a bell, and when anybody wanted to speak they would have to ring the bell. But he thought it over and he realised that ringing a bell inside a busy restaurant might be too much of a distraction for some of the patrons. Then he thought about using a torch that he could shine on one of the group, and that person then had to speak. As the train pulled into Redemption Station, Clive lifted his bag off the floor and put on his woolen hat and gloves. When Clive got off the train, he felt the cold and was glad that he brought his hat and gloves. He made his way through the cold and was glad as he huddled together away from the wind and amongst the people as they crossed the concourse to the city street they went. And there, at the intersection of Trent Street and Alice Avenue, when he walked across the road, he saw a stone about the size of a fist lying there in front of a drain hole in the gutter. And he thought to himself, yes, that's exactly what I need. Clive bent down and lifted the stone from its resting place, and he put it in the bag over his shoulder. Lunchtime came, and Clive sat in the usual spot and was joined by the other three philosophers. He had a stone sitting in the centre of the table, waiting. And just before they started the theme of the day, Clive lifted the stone and he said, "Today we have a new rule. Anyone who wants to speak has to lift the stone and hold it. No one else can speak while that person holds the stone. They all must wait until the stone then is put back on the table." The group all decided to try out the stone, and they got started after ordering some seafood and salad. Clive lifted the stone and started to talk. "There are so many questions, but not enough answers. Mystery does not use logic, and intellect cannot fathom the ways of supernature. So who can tell me how a man can become an eagle, or how can a terminal cancer disappear from someone's body and yet still be present in an X-ray?" The other three in the group listened in awe, and they were speechless. As Clive put the stone down, Harry picked it up, and immediately he felt inspired to talk. Sometimes in this life we all need an escape hatch. Our imagination is very powerful, and we have the ability to transform ourselves into an eagle that can soar through the sky. In deep meditation, people have said that they have visited ancient places and tribes. Harry put the stone down and everyone looked a little shocked. Then Al reached out and lifted the stone. He too became inspired, and words flowed from him in a natural way. "Faith is an unseen seed that grows within the spirit. Healing is one of the unseen gifts to those who have faith. You prove a miracle has happened just by belief. It's true, as they are the unseen works of God. So if God has removed a cancer from a man, believe it. It's true. Miracles are the evidence of God's hand at work. We are only human and we can't see the unseen. If X-rays cannot show the spirit within, then how do we expect to see the miracle of cancer that was healed?" Al put down the stone, and no one spoke. There was silence. The waitress brought some food to the table, and all four began to eat. Without any of them noticing, the waitress removed the stone from the table and tossed it into the rubbish. After the philosophers finished their seafood, Clive asked, "Now, what were we talking about?" No one could remember. It was as if the discussion had never happened. Craig asked, "What was the theme today again, Clive?" Clive replied, "I was wanting to discuss food and how culture plays a role in what we eat. Now, where is the stone that I brought with me?" They all looked around for the stone, but it was gone. Clive called one of the waiting staff and asked to speak with the waitress who brought their food, but she had already left. She'd gone home. So in place of the stone, Clive proposed that the group use the salt cellar on the table as the device to keep the discussion in order, and they all agreed. So Al lifted the salt cellar and he said, "Here's some food for thought. Every Tuesday the four of us eat together. That is one way that we communicate our acceptance of who we are, and it strengthens our bond of friendship through the food we eat." One by one they all spoke in turn, and after an hour they paid the bill and left Mad Hatter's, all the wealthier for the experience. Then they said goodbye and went their separate ways, with no recollection of the deep and meaningful conversation that they had when they all held the touchstone, and without even knowing, something inside each of them had changed. Their minds had been opened, and now their lives would change from that moment on. They would soon all benefit from the knowledge that had been passed on to them. It was just after midnight on a wild, wet Wednesday, and the cold, dark city streets were a merciless place. In an alleyway, a hungry homeless man was going through the rubbish bins behind Mad Hatter's restaurant. As he searched through some of the garbage, he found some half-eaten steaks and rice dishes. As he continued to look through the garbage bags, he pulled out the touchstone from one of the garbage bags, and there was a warmth about it, and the tramp held on to it with his cold, numb fingers before walking away to the park where he stayed at night. The park was his home, where he lived, alone, and no one ever bothered him there. During the night, the stone kept him warm and brought him a comforting presence that he had never felt before. He slept deeply and dreamt that he was a king living in a beautiful palace with many servants. They all catered for his needs. He had a wife and a family who loved him very much, and they were all a very happy family indeed. In the morning, when he awoke, the wind around him tossed papers in the air, and the sound of traffic on the street told him that it was morning rush hour time. He quickly made his way to the civic walkway, where he begged every morning for money for food. He sat down on his usual spot, and he placed the stone in front of him. It was very unusual for anyone to stop and say hello, but suddenly a well-dressed man in a suit stopped and spoke. Good morning, how are you? The tramp replied.
I'm hungry, but still alive. How are you, sir?
The man in the smart suit smiled, and then he looked at the stone. How much do you want for that stone in front of you? The tramp replied.
Well, the thing is, sir, it's a magic stone, and I wasn't going to sell it.
I'll give you $100 for it, said the man in the suit, who took some notes out of his wallet and reached them out to the tramp, who immediately handed over the stone. The businessman put the stone in his briefcase and walked away, and the tramp got up and he went off to buy himself a hot breakfast in the town. A short time later, the man who had the stone walked in through the front door of the Air Square building, where he took the lift to the top floor. He opened the door to his office and was greeted by his secretary. Good morning, Mr. Taylor. I thought you were leaving for China this morning, she said, and he replied, Good morning, Deirdre. I thought you were leaving? Of course I'm leaving, Deirdre. You know what? We take so much for granted in life, don't we? How do you mean? She asked. Well, this morning I just stopped for some reason and spoke to this homeless man who was sitting there on the side of the road. He told me that he was hungry, and I thought to myself, what if he was my son? The secretary smiled, and she said, How nice of you to think like that, Mr. Taylor. The businessman opened up his briefcase and took out the touchstone, and he said, The thing is, Deirdre, all that this homeless man had in his possession was this here stone. I opened my wallet and offered him $100 for it. His secretary seemed a little puzzled, and she said, How generous of you, Mr. Taylor. What a wonderful thing to do. Thank you, Deirdre. I have lots of money, but all he had was a stone that he gave to me for $100. I have probably too much money sometimes, and maybe this stone just meant something. I don't know. Maybe I'll use it as a paperweight or something. I'm sure he'll get a decent breakfast for a change. Oh, Deirdre, can you confirm my appointment in Beijing tomorrow? Tell them that I'll be on the midday flight. I just need to pick up a few files that I forgot to take last night." "Yes, Mr. Taylor. Are there any changes to your schedule since yesterday?" he replied. "That's another reason that I'm here this morning. There is one change that you need to slot in. After the 2-day conference on happiness in Beijing, I am going to Bhutan. This morning, I was informed that I am the person that will represent and present the Square project at the gathering of the Global Net Corporations Network." "Congratulations, Mr. Taylor. That's wonderful news." "Yes, so after I present our project on creating a dementia-friendly environment, I am staying at the Bhutan Suites until the decision is made on which of the 20 projects will be funded. Following that, I will text you a day before my return." "Yes, so after I present that project, I suppose, fingers crossed, we will be selected and the funding will come for Square." The phone rang and Deirdre picked up the phone, and Mr. Taylor made his way into his office. She gave him the thumbs up as he turned back, and he walked into his office and put the stone on his desk, and he opened up the drawer, taking out some files. He put those in his briefcase and thought for a moment, and then he placed the stone back in his briefcase. As he closed the door of his office, Deirdre hung up the phone at the reception. She stood up and extended her hand, and Mr. Taylor reached out with a soft handshake, and she smiled and said, "Best of luck with the project. How do you think it will go, Mr. Taylor?" He replied, "It's about love and respect for all people who have dementia. It's a global condition that needs to be addressed. So I'm sure we'll have a great chance of getting the green light to go ahead." She sat down and said, "We're all with you, Mr. Taylor." He replied, "I know that, and thank you. See you in a week, Deirdre. Look after the fort while I'm gone." "Never fear. Deirdre is here. By the way, Mr. Taylor, how is your fear of flying these days?" He put on a brave face and said, "Well, of course I'm worried, but I'm not in a frantic panic that I used to be." With that, he quickly left and took a taxi to the airport. Later that morning, he took a window seat on the plane and started doing some deep breathing exercises. As the plane's engines warmed up, he started fumbling and fidgeting. He thought of the stone and immediately opened his briefcase. The moment he touched the stone, his heart rate fell to a resting pace, and his breathing was much slower. He felt relaxed and at peace. The plane was now on the runway and on its way to China. During the flight, he read over the notes before the plane landed, just to accustom himself again to the presentation on dementia-friendly society. And he wasn't that confident anymore, and he wasn't that happy about the project. In fact, the more he read, the more he became stressed. He kept touching the stone beside him. He felt reassured. Then he felt inspired, and he started writing down some notes. Now he began to think differently about his presentation. He opened a notebook on his small device and started to compose a new document entitled "Help for the Hungry and Homeless." He started to write sentence after sentence without stopping, and ideas were popping into his head. From time to time, he reached out and lifted the stone, and new ideas came to him. He finished the document, and he looked at what he had written. He couldn't believe that it was him that had wrote that project. It was a brilliant piece of work. And he knew that this was going to be the project that he would present at the Global Corporations event. Suddenly, the airplane went into a dive. It fell fast, maybe 100, 200 feet. Some of the passengers were screaming and reaching out and calling for help. Mr. Taylor held the stone, and as he did, he felt composed and at ease. The plane dropped again. The fasten your seatbelt sign came on, and a voice spoke through the overhead audio system. "This is Roger Malone, your captain speaking. Please don't be alarmed. We are currently experiencing some turbulence. Please stay in your seat and remain calm. It will soon clear." So Mr. Taylor sat there untroubled, with his stone in his hand. And all the events that were taking place had no impact on him at all. All he could think about was the new project that he would be presenting in Bhutan. He was a man on a mission now, and for some unknown reason, it was a project that he believed in, and it was something that he felt passionate about. After the plane cleared the turbulence, it wasn't long before it landed at the airport in Beijing, and it was a damp Thursday morning, and Mr. Taylor was met by a small welcome party, and a driver was organized to bring him to his hotel near the conference center. The room was comfortable, and after unpacking, he checked all of the text messages on his mobile phone. One message from Deirdre told the story of a lucky homeless man who had won first prize in the lottery last night. In the story, it mentioned the homeless man who had stated that he was given $100 by a businessman who bought the stone that he had found in a rubbish bin, and how he used some of that money to buy the lottery ticket that won him first prize. Mr. Taylor couldn't believe it. The incident had confirmed to him that his mission to help the hungry and homeless people was more than a dream. Inside his heart, he felt so happy, and he couldn't wait for the conference on happiness to begin, and the following selection at the corporation's event of projects presented by 20 corporations worldwide. Mr. Taylor that day went to lunch, where he ate and enjoyed the company of some of those who were there and going to speak, presenting their projects in Bhutan. One of the men who spoke with him was called Digby Maximilian, and they enjoyed each other's company so much they became instant friends. Digby was representing a large Italian corporation. Mr. Taylor shared some of what he would be presenting at Bhutan, and how he loved the concept of helping the homeless and hungry people, and Digby Maximilian felt the passion burning in him, and he too fell in love with the project. When he asked if he could read through the presentation, Mr. Taylor agreed, and he went back to the hotel room to get it for him. So when he returned, he gave the document over for a deeper appraisal from Digby Maximilian, who was very grateful, and he said that he would return the project later in the evening. They both agreed to meet at the gym, and they discussed playing a game of squash before dinner. So they parted company, and Mr. Taylor remained there in the dining room for a while, because he had a sudden chest pain. Then he thought of the stone, and a shooting pain ran up his arm. He was trying to make it to the lift. All he could think of was the stone, and he started to panic. He ran to the lift, and he collapsed onto the ground. One of the hotel staff rushed to his aid and called for an ambulance. out of the hotel. He was taken on a stretcher in the ambulance, but Mr. Taylor had died on the way to the hospital. That evening, when Digby waited, as arranged, at the gym for Mr. Taylor, who never showed, he became worried and went to the room number that he was given, and he found that the door of Mr. Taylor's room was left open. So he went inside, and he sat there, and he saw the stone sitting on the table, and he lifted it up, and he whispered, "There must be something, somewhere. I must go and find you. I feel there's something wrong." So he went to the reception, still holding the stone. Subconsciously, he didn't even realize he was carrying the stone. One of the staff at the hotel explained to Digby that Mr. Taylor had died. Digby couldn't believe it. He had only known him for a little while, and yet felt such a friendship. So he went back to his room, and he decided that he would take the project on homelessness and present it to the panel in Bhutan. And he whispered, "Mr. Taylor, I feel your passion. Will do all I can to share that with others. I'm so glad, and I'm sure you wouldn't mind if I was to take this stone of yours along for good luck." It was Friday, and Digby decided to leave for Bhutan instead of attending the conference. He wasn't in the mood to be part of any happiness concept. Digby arrived in Bhutan, and after leaving his belongings in the hotel, he went for a walk, and he thought about Mr. Taylor, who had made a big impression on him, and he couldn't believe that he had died so suddenly. He walked for a while, and he sat in silence, and was approached by an old man with a prayer wheel, who asked him, "What makes you so sad?" Digby replied, "I just made a friend yesterday, and he died the same day." The old man replied, "You were destined to meet him. His journey is over now. Just be happy for him. Know that he had chosen you to be the last person in his life, the last person he would be with and share the last moments." Digby took out the stone, and he said, "I took this from his room to remember him. I know it's just a stone, but somehow I felt he wanted me to take it." The old man smiled, and he took the stone from Digby, and he said, "Now I understand. Yes, my name is Tinley. I am a Tibetan monk from Lhasa, and I often escape to the west with some of my touchstones and give them to people I think might need them. This one in your possession is one of my touchstones." Digby smiled. "Maybe then the stone has fulfilled its destiny and has come back to you, its owner. Please take it and share it with anyone who needs it. I know my friend would want that." The old monk took the stone, and he said, "You have a purpose to be here in Bhutan. Whatever that is will be achieved." Old man walked away, holding the stone. After the weekend, Digby Maximilian stood there before a large group of people about to present Mr. Taylor's project. He knew that what he was doing was the right thing, and he began to speak to the audience. "On behalf of my late friend Mr. Taylor from Eyre Square, I would like to present his project on how to alleviate the hungry and the homeless of the world. I had on my presentation my own project. We were both to represent the corporations who we work for. However, this project I am presenting is something that was chosen to be here because it's a worthy cause. He is not able to be here because he has passed on from this life. And I know that Mr. Taylor wouldn't mind me presenting his project to you. I had known this man for just a short time, but I could see the passion and the fire in his eyes when he had this concept to help the hungry and homeless. And I would like you all to join me in welcoming the written words of the late Mr. Taylor. He read each word, and after he had finished, the applause was thunderous. And he explained during the reading her Mr. Taylor's idea to help millions of hungry, homeless people could become a reality, and how they could be assisted if the funding came through from the corporation's event, if they were selected. As he spoke, Digby's voice was hypnotic, and everyone in the building sat in silence. And there was a feeling of mutual love and respect that moved like a wave on the ocean, touching the heart of everyone who was there. When Digby had finished the presentation, there was a rapturous applause from everyone that echoed all through the auditorium. So after a brief judgment was made, they selected the project that was to be funded, and it was R Square's Hello, Welcome to Alleviating the Hungry and the Homeless. So Digby, on their behalf, went to receive the award for the Hungry and the Homeless project, and again received a thunderous applause. And as he returned back to his seat, he saw at the back of the hall Tinley, the old monk, standing with the stone, holding it above his head. Walking out the door, he waved goodbye. The R Square project made world headlines, and within 3 years, the number of people who were hungry and homeless were reduced by 3 million. The end.